You're listening to Carrie Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Welcome. This is Financial Survival Network. I'm your host, Carrie Lutz. We had this person on a couple months back, and then something happened, something major. Talking about Chris Simmons, author of the book Castro's Nemesis, True Stories of a Master Spycatcher. Chris, when you were last on, we talked about how you nailed the spy, major spy in the State Department. I believe her name was Ana Montes. And no sooner do we have that interview than 2 weeks later, they let her out of prison after serving 20 years. Normally, when you let a spy out of the slammer, you get something back. What was the point of all this?
She was arrested in the days after 9/11, and the Pentagon and the Justice Department were more focused on getting her to a plea agreement so we could find out the extent of the damage. So she pled guilty to one count of espionage or conspiracy to commit espionage in return for what was supposed to be full cooperation during her interrogation.
And the way you say that, I assume you never received full cooperation, because once a commie, always a commie.
She was very egotistical, and that was a key part of her motivation. So during interrogation, if someone was in there that she sensed didn't know the issue as well as she did, she would talk circles around them. And by the time they would get back to their parent organization and figure out she'd been minimizing or misdirecting, she was ready to play the game again. We were fortunate during the 6 months we interrogated her that because she knew who we were, she respected us. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but she was gratified to see someone that were experts on Cuba on what she thought was her level. And so for her, when we were interrogating her, it was less of a game and more of a real battle, between opponents. But we knew her well enough. We could push her hot buttons, get her agitated. She'd start sharing her secrets. And then by the time she calmed down and started shutting down, we could just repeat the process all day, every day. But at the end, in the days before sentencing, the Justice Department asked us, did we believe she fully cooperated? And our statement for the record was she cooperated under duress.
Oh, man. So what were her hot buttons? I mean, that Che Guevara was a ruthless murderer, that Castro enslaved his people. What did she care about enough to get upset?
She hated dealing with reality. And I say that in the sense that she was able to compartmentalize conflicting data better than anyone I've ever met. So she could look at the situation at the time, Nicaragua, and tell herself the Sandinistas were the legitimate government. We were trying to overthrow them, and that's immoral. We turned that argument on her and said, you were feeding information to the Cubans about U.S. military operations in El Salvador, and the communist guerrillas are trying to overthrow an elected government, and that's immoral. And she would look at us and say, the situations are totally different. But it was the same argument, but in her mind, it was totally different. And she did that on a regular basis where, psychologically, if the facts didn't fit her version of the truth, she built a wall and just refused to accept it. But the things that we could get her on so successfully, again, El Salvador was, once we got through the initial parts, we focused on how do you sit there? Because for 3 years, she briefed every Green Beret team going into El Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
And then she told the Cubans where they were going, how long they would be on the ground, any special missions or special weapons they had. They would relay it to the guerrillas in the expectation that the guerrillas would be able to kill some of them. Mm-hmm. And we asked her, how do you do that? How do you sit at a table with someone and talk to them with the sole intent of, I'm going to try to get you killed? And she looked at us and said, it was nothing personal. We were just on different sides of the same issue. They were volunteers just like I was. And it's as simple as that. And there was no emotion in her voice at all. And I know she believed everything she had just said, even though no rational person would think that way.
Wow.
She was comfortable with that type of disconnect.
It's said that like successful people are always able to manage ambiguity, right? And it seems to definitely be the case with her, because I mean, it's got to be some cognitive dissonance there or something, right? But
absolutely. And
able to deal with it.
And when you were asking about when we could her hot buttons, another situation was Panama. She was still covering mostly El Salvador and Nicaragua at the time, but she had admitted to the FBI already that she had shared some information on Panama. And so we revisited that, and she gave us the same storyline she gave the Bureau, which was unacceptable to us. And so we backed up and basically made the argument to her. We appealed to her ego and said, we know, and you know, that you're one of Castro's top agents. And at the time of the Panama invasion, the Cuban embassy in Panama City was the largest in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So our argument to her was, you're telling us one of Castro's most important agents would not come to the aid of its most important spy center in the world. How could if you were that special, of course you would have been there helping. So your story doesn't fit. And again, we just kept appealing to our ego of either you're special or you're not. And if you're not important enough to help with Panama, and of course, once we went after the ego, she started sharing more and more. And then when we thought we had pretty much exhausted her on this topic, but that she still had a couple issues she was holding back, we made up something, because in an interrogation, you don't have to tell the truth if you're the interrogator.
Of course.
And so we simply shared with her that you realize the archives of the entire Panama Defense Force were turned over to the U.S. government, and they're sitting in a warehouse in Suitland, Maryland. And we've been going through them. Now, the first part was true, that we're sitting in a warehouse. We had not had time to go through them, but she didn't know that.
Of course.
And so we just fed her fears of, you agreed to fully cooperate. We've got millions of linear feet of information that contradicts everything you've just said. It's the year after 9/11. You breach your plea agreement now, you're going to go to prison for life.
Mm.
And again, between the ego and the fear, we were able to get more information about what she was providing on Panama.
Mm-hmm.
And we just, any major issues, we just kept repeating that cycle, and it always worked.
That's amazing that, she's obviously very sophisticated spy, right? And very competent at her craft. And yet, I guess the isolation, right? You isolate these people from all their routines, everything they know, and then you just keep hammering away at them, right?
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Torque Resources is an exploration company establishing a portfolio of premier copper-gold early-stage projects in Chile. Torque's management and technical teams have a strong track record of raising capital, discovery, and monetization of exploration successes. The company's Margarita Copper-Gold project is located within the prolific coastal Cordillera Belt in Chile, which hosts some of the world's largest and most profitable copper mines. The Margarita project possesses excellent discovery potential for a major copper discovery due to the strength of the alteration system, large-scale magnetic targets, and the presence of copper oxide mineralization. Drilling is anticipated to begin in Q3 of this year. Torque trades in Canada under TORQ and on the OTC under TRBMF. To learn more, go to torqueresources.com. That's torqueresources.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network. The information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Absolutely. And we have to remember, when you go into with someone like her, they're already very isolated in the sense that for their espionage career, they tend to distance themselves from friends, disengage, because friendships can compromise your espionage. And so they tend to be loners as it is. And so you just continue to exploit that isolation. And in her case, between the ego and there was a part of her that loved the challenge of, for lack of better terms, a good interrogation. She thrived in battle, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so for her to sit there and argue issues for 3 or 4 hours, she was much more engaged and passionate during that time than if you were asking about things that weren't interesting to her. But part of that isolation also enabled us to exploit her body language.
Right.
Because she was socially awkward. Now, she was a gifted, when she needed to be, she was a gifted chameleon. And in real life, she was an severe introvert. But I witness occasions where she would be in a meeting in Miami with every Cuba watcher in the U.S. government. And she would become the social butterfly and meet and greet everyone and remember their names and organizations, just every detail. And then the second she walked out of that room, she'd shut down again. And so it was thrilling and exciting for us to be able to go in and knowing her as we did to, again, get her on the hot button issues and then watch her body language to tell us when we were getting close and when she was still hiding. And we were able to share, for example, there were times with the FBI where we could tell that her body language went negative. And she literally, in one situation, gave one of the interviewing agents a cold shoulder in the middle of the interrogation. He literally turned sideways. And for whatever reason, he didn't pick it up at that time. But when we showed him on the tape of, here's where you lost control. Here's what you had just asked her when you lost control. So he was able to go back and revisit it and keep her under control. And he got the information he needed.
All right. So now that she's out of prison after 20 years, what do you think? Did she go back to Cuba? I can't find any follow-up on any.
No, she's still on probation, so she's not allowed to leave the country. Her family lives in Miami, and that's the last place she would want to go. So she went to relatives in Puerto Rico, and where there's I don't want to say a large, but a passionate left-wing movement in Puerto Rico. So she's got a support base there to sustain her for the next 3 years while she's on probation.
Mm-hmm. So she's on probation.
Correct. And in Puerto Rico, she'll get a lot less media attention than she would in the continental U.S.
Okay. Yeah. So interesting. So it's one of those cases of you can't go home again.
No, and realistically, the Cubans would never want her at this point because Cuban intelligence has a very harsh view on once any of their agents go to prison, they consider that agent tainted for life and untrustworthy.
Compromised, huh?
Exactly. And so
wow.
Even the ones we returned several years ago, when we did a trade, 5 of theirs for one of ours, the 5 that they had run a media campaign for a decade, lionizing these 5 spies. Once they were back in their custody, removed from the intelligence service, removed from anything like that, and given moderate level political jobs. And that's always been the case. A second you go to prison, you are dead to the regime.
Wow, that's amazing. Huh. Well, I find this whole thing.
You spend your whole life working for someone, and then the second you screw up, they tell you you're of no value. Thanks for nothing.
Yeah, well, once they're done, they're done. So
Absolutely.
Interesting. So, as far as where we're at now, in terms of intelligence, all of this, people like that, they're obviously all over the place, right? Infiltrated the government.
Yes, they are.
From various countries all over the world.
We are the most targeted nation in the world. And it's a lot of people, they don't understand espionage. For nations, there's an old expression that nations don't have friends, they have interest. And that really captures the essence. Like even when our allies, when Israelis spy against us, they're not doing it because they see us as the enemy. They're doing it because their interests do not match our national interests. And so they want to make sure that they've always got leverage in the relationship. Or if we have information they want, but we are unwilling to share, they don't see it as unreasonable to steal the information.
Yeah.
And the French are the same. The French in France, the aerospace industry is nationalized. And so the theft of American aerospace secrets, we would call it economic espionage. They would call it competitor intelligence. So in France, it's not a crime for them to steal our secrets because the survival of France is at stake. So I would probably almost 100 countries operating against the United States, against the issues that are most important to them right now. And so you get some that are very, I hesitate to use the term low risk, but are less of a threat, whereas some of the others, and Cuba's a good example, a lot of people look at Cuba and say they're not a threat to us, but Cuba has made the theft of U.S. secrets into a commodity. So U.S. secrets are bought and sold, and it's much easier for the Cubans to do it rather than the Russians or the Chinese because the Bureau's focused on the Russians and the Chinese. So the Cubans can do it faster, more successfully, and at a lower cost. And so as we need to understand, there's a lot of situations where major powers are outsourcing their work to what we would look at as secondary players, because who's going to go after the JV when you're distracted by the varsity squad?
Yep, this is true. Interesting situation. Very interesting here. And, well, I guess this game continues. It's always been the case where the world's dominant power is host to all of its enemies. And the enemies couldn't be where they were without the world's dominant power. We'll see how long this power game can actually continue. Chris, it's always great to have you on. Again, the book is Castro's Nemesis, True Stories of a Master Spycatcher. And you can find it on Amazon and wherever fine books used to be sold. And if you got a question for Chris, shoot us an email, kl@kerrylutz.com. Make sure you go to the site, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Get your free newsletter subscription. Chris, a pleasure. And hopefully we'll talk to you again for your next book.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.